Louise, the rendezvous officer here in the Space Shuttle control room. That's coming up next. Good evening from the Christopher C. Craft Junior Mission Control Center. This is the Space Shuttle Flight Control Room, where Quatziala Barujo is the flight director in charge of activities. We're going to start our series of interviews with flight controllers today. We're going to be bringing you a series of interviews with flight controllers both on the Space Shuttle side and on the International Space Station side, which is another room in the same building here. We're going to start off today with Rendezvous Officer Sarah Ruiz. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, thanks.
Well, hey, we got a couple of questions for you, and let's start off with the fact you're a rendezvous officer here in Mission Control. What is your job?
Well, like you said, I'm a rendezvous officer. Our full title is Rendezvous Guidance and Procedures Officer, and it's that second part that really gives a little bit more of an idea of what we actually do. What we do is monitor a specific phase of flight, both the rendezvous phase and then the undock phase after we leave the International Space Station. And so it's really interesting. It's a little bit different than some of the other flight control positions in this room because we don't actually own any hardware. We don't work with a system of hardware. Instead, we're in charge of a phase of flight. And so we're monitoring everything that goes on with rendezvous and anything that could happen that would affect our ability to get to the International Space Station.
And that's a real kind of a ballet in orbit, isn't it?
It really is. It requires the coordination of a lot of different people and a lot of different groups to get there, for sure. I work with a lot of other people inside the flight control room. Starting with up front, we work with our flight dynamics officers. The analogy I always like to use is they drive the car around the neighborhood, and then we drive it into your specific house. So, you know, they bring us on flight day 1 and 2. They get us to about 40 nautical miles away from the space station, and then that's when the rendezvous officer really takes over and does kind of the precision fine-tuning using the shuttle's onboard sensors to actually get to the International Space Station for a successful docking. We also work with a lot of the other flight controllers in this room, the guidance and navigation, the propulsion officer, the INCO communications officer, and all of those guys, because each of their systems really affects the shuttle's capability to get there. If you can't talk to the crew, then that's a problem. If the radar is not picking up the space station and providing data on how far away you are and how fast you're approaching, that's a problem. You need all of the jets to be operating properly in order to be able to fine-tune your trajectory, your course towards the station. So there's a whole lot of different things that come into play when you're trying to get there. It definitely is a ballet, like you said.
And there's actually some crews that the astronauts on orbit have, some tools that the astronauts on orbit have that help with making those decisions as well, right?
They do. They have a lot of different tools. Some of them are integrated into the shuttle itself, and then some of them have been kind of added on over the years as we've improved our technology. That's one of the things that my console is in charge of, is the software, the onboard guidance software, and that's what's used to actually both take data. We use a combination of star trackers, which is a piece of hardware, as well as the rendezvous radar. Those both have the capability to track the space station and give us the two most important things we need to know, which is how far away are you and how fast are you approaching. And using that data, we're able to control our burns. We do a series of burns as we approach the space station, progressively smaller as we just start tweaking our trajectory along the way there. And so we use a lot of those sensors. Those are incorporated into the orbiter itself. And then once we get really close, we call it into proximity operations, which is within about, say, 2,000 feet of the station. We start to use another set of tools on board, which is all run through the onboard PGSC network. It's basically the laptops that are on board. And those tools take in data from TCS, which is our trajectory control sensor. It's a laser that uses a series of reflectors that are on the International Space Station. And so using that laser, it hits those reflectors and also provides us, again, with range and range rate, distance and speed. And those go through those onboard computers for the crew to use as well. People who are familiar with watching the rendezvous on NASA TV might recognize it. It looks rather rudimentary, but it's very effective. It's got a kind of like a stick outline of the space shuttle on the space station and shows the shuttle approaching it. That's called our RPOP program, Rendezvous and Proximity Operations Program. And so that's what the crew uses as they get closer.
Okay, and that's going to be coming up on Wednesday when you guys are going to be docking to the space station. So that's when you're really going to get busy, right?
That's true, yeah. The busiest days for the rendezvous officer are flight day 3, which is our rendezvous day with the space station, and then the undock day, whatever mission day that happens to fall on. So on flight day 1 and 2, we're just basically getting ready for flight day 3. We publish our timeline so that everyone in the control center knows kind of when the events are going to be happening. The big activities that happen on flight day 2, so that will be happening tomorrow afternoon, are our rendezvous tools checkout. That's when the crew will set up those laptops that I just mentioned and make sure that they're operating correctly. We have centerline camera install. That's another sensor that I didn't mention, but it's a camera that gets installed in the docking system itself that provides video for the crew to use as well, that they use for their flying, and that gets installed tomorrow as well.
Okay, and then at the last minute, you're basically combining this, equalizing the speeds of two vehicles traveling 17,500 miles an hour. What's the relative velocity that you want when you get the shuttle dock into the space station?
It's surprisingly slow, which anyone who's ever watched it before probably thinks, what in the world is taking them so long? Our nominal docking speed is about 0.1 foot per second, which if you ever try and walk at 0.1 foot per second, it's hard to even walk that slow. So it's very slow. We want to hit just hard enough that the docking mechanism connects, but not so hard that we damage anything, obviously.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to that on Wednesday. How about you? How long have you worked for NASA? And are you a federal employee or a contractor employee? And tell us a little bit about that.
I am a federal employee. I'm a civil servant. I have worked here for 9 years full-time, and actually 14, I think that's right, 14 years total. I started here as a co-op student when I was in college. Which is a great program that I would recommend to anyone who's interested in kind of trying to get in at the ground level. So I worked here while I was in college as a co-op, and then when I graduated, I started here full-time 9 years ago.
Okay. And where are you from originally?
I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and then went to Atlanta. I went to college at Georgia Tech and got my bachelor's degree there in aerospace engineering. After that, I went to Stanford University for a year and got a master's degree there, also in, well, they call it aeronautics and astronautics, but same subject.
Okay. And what's the most interesting part of your job? It's not just you're here during the mission, but there's a lot of other things you do to get ready for the mission. What overall is the most interesting part?
You know, one of my favorite things about being a rendezvous officer is that we get to see, I think more than some of the other positions, how everything really ties together. Since we don't own any specific pieces of hardware, we're more of a phase specialist. We own a phase of flight. And so it's really interesting to me to see how all the different systems and all the different console operators in here work together, both during the flight, obviously, but in all of the months and years leading up to the flight as well, to really plan everything and do all the pre-coordination to make things go so smoothly when we're on orbit, you know. And I've been fortunate that most of the flights that I've worked have been extremely smooth. You know, we haven't really had any major issues to deal with. We've been going to the International Space Station for many years now, and we have a pretty good handle on what that involves. And so it's really fun to see the coordination. And again, I remember you called it a ballet earlier. It's really just fun to see the coordination and all the effort that goes into making that happen so successfully. It's kind of surprising how smoothly everything goes every time, given all the different pieces that have to line up in order for that to happen.
Well, even though things go smoothly most of the time, do you ever have tense moments on console?
It's always a little tense right when we get towards the end of rendezvous and we get into proximity operations and getting close to docking. fortunately, our crews are extremely well trained. I think not everyone realizes this, but rendezvous is actually a very manual process. The shuttle cannot dock to the space station automatically. The crew members have to physically fly it. So for this mission, Mark Kelly will be at the controls, looking at the video camera and using the hand controllers to quite literally fly it right up to the space station. And so that's always a little tense when we get into proximity operations and we're monitoring them. But as I said, they're extremely well trained, so we know they're going to do a great job. The most tense moments I've ever had on console have not been when the shuttle is actually flying. It's been in our lead up to flight on the ground when we've been training. Our training team and our simulation supervisors are very crafty at coming up with creative ways to make us completely rethink what our plan had been beforehand. So I've been fortunate to have many more tense moments in Sims than I ever have had on console in real life.
Okay. Well, hey, just as a last question, you've been doing this for 9 years. It's a rewarding career choice, as you've said. Do you have any words of encouragement for youngsters that might want to be interested in getting involved in spaceflight?
Yeah, the stereotypical advice that's always given really is true. You have to work hard in school. It helps if you do well in both math and science, as well as the other subjects, which are also important. Read as much as you can. Read as much as you can about NASA, about the space program. And then the other thing I always tell people is they think of NASA as this big engineering organization and, I have to go and be an engineer, or I have to go and study a lot of math. But there's so many different people with all kinds of different backgrounds that work at NASA that there's really pretty much anything you can do and still be a part of the space program. We have public affairs people like yourself, we have business people, we have human resources people. I mean, NASA's a huge organization. You don't have to be an engineer to work here. Obviously, if you want to be an engineer, I think that's great. That's what I am. But I would encourage anyone who's interested in the space program, no matter what you might want to major in school or what kind of career path you might want to go on, to look at NASA and consider whether you might be able to contribute.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for being here with us this evening. It's really interesting to hear what happens in the world of a rendezvous officer and when the tense things happen and how you coordinate with all the other team members here in Mission Control. We're hoping to have some more of those team members, both from the shuttle side and from the station side, a little bit later on in the mission. But that's the first of our on-console interviews. And Sarah Rees, thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you.